Welcome to the Secrets of the Bible channel. Mother Teresa's final years were plagued with difficulties. She was experiencing poor health and physical suffering, which became a daily burden for her. 4 years prior to her death, she confided something shocking to her fellow sisters. Let's find out exactly what it is, and trust me, you'll not want to miss this. Mother Teresa, despite founding the Missionaries of Charity, had a deep fear that she or one of her fellow sisters or brothers would do or say something scandalous that would detract from the mission of the order. This fear may explain why she was hesitant to publicly discuss the interior battle of faith she experienced during her final days. However, even though Teresa tried to avoid scandal, it eventually caught up with her, but only after she had passed away for 10 years. And here's where the story starts to get really interesting. In 2007, a book called Come Be My Light was published, featuring her personal and private correspondence. This book caused both sorrow and confusion among her admirers, and a sense of delight in her critics. They were taking pleasure in someone else's misfortune. In her letters, it was revealed that, apart from a brief period, Teresa experienced a profound sense of God's absence for the last 50 years of her life. Despite this spiritual darkness, she remained devoted to the work that she had undertaken for God, and most of the world remained unaware of her inner struggles. When the news broke, many Christians were perplexed. What did Teresa's prolonged spiritual wilderness signify? Was she battling depression? Had she lost her faith in God? What gave her the strength to continue, even when she felt abandoned by God? Even Teresa's closest companions and the Missionaries of Charity were bewildered. She had never explicitly mentioned her darkness, except for a vague allusion that would have been incomprehensible to anyone but her confessors, to whom she continued her inner turmoil. 4 years before her death, she cautioned her fellow sisters about the continuous presence of the devil who attempts to make them feel that Jesus doesn't truly love or cling to them. Little did they know that this warning was autobiographical. So, what did the critics do, now that Mother Teresa was no more, and they could defame her however they wanted? Well, you may want to pay close attention now. Teresa's critics seized upon the revelations in Can't Be My Light to portray her as a fake saint, accusing her of hypocrisy for showcasing her devotion. Christopher Hitchens, a long-standing critic, characterized Teresa as a confused old lady who had ceased to believe. He argued that her service to others was merely an attempt to quell her own misery. He also claimed that the Catholic Church's interpretation of Teresa's spiritual desert as a dark night of the soul was a twisted marketing ploy, turning despair into faith. Mother Teresa was depressed. Being depressed leads to lethargy, but Mother Teresa was always active, driven by her sense of calling from God. Moreover, dark periods don't necessarily indicate a loss of faith. They are seen as powerful moments of spiritual growth in the Christian tradition. Many Christian saints have shared their experiences of darkness in their relationship with God, but the best analysis comes from St. John of the Cross, a 16th-century mystic. Mother Teresa was familiar with his writings, which expressed her longing for God, but also her feeling of being unwanted by him. But here's where the story starts to take a turn. According to John the Cross, the dark night of the soul is a feeling of abandonment by God. It involves immense pain and agony, as if being burdened with darkness. However, this feeling of rejection is actually a purging process that prepares the soul for a deep connection with God. The duration of a dark night of the soul varies, and while doubts may arise, it doesn't mean the sufferer has stopped believing in God. In her letters, Mother Teresa expressed the terrible pain of feeling rejected by God and the absence of his existence. However, she was not alone. Did you know that even Saint Thérèse de Lisieux also experienced a sense of abandonment? So what exactly is going on here? Let's dive a little deeper. Mother Teresa's suffering during God's absence was intense, as evident in her private correspondence. She longed for God, yet the darkness continued to increase, leading to a contradiction within her soul. She sought solace in Our Lady and felt that God had forsaken her. The darkness was overwhelming, making her feel utterly alone. Teresa devoted herself to this work because she believed that it was what Christ demanded of her. As she frequently expressed, when she tended to the poor and the sick, she ministered to Christ in his distressing disguise, the Christ. Given that she shared in the suffering of the people she served, it was perhaps inevitable that Teresa would eventually perceive her own inner poverty as a participation in the suffering of Christ himself. But let's take a pause for a moment, because to truly understand the significance of this, we need to go back in time a bit. In 1962, during her second decade of feeling abandoned, Teresa wrote something that foreshadowed her later understanding of her calling to share in the suffering of Christ's passion. She stated, "If I ever become a saint, I will surely be one of darkness. I will continually be absent from heaven to light the way for those in darkness on earth." This statement is remarkable because it suggests that Mother Teresa was willing to forgo the joy of heaven for the sake of those of us who also lie awake at night, pondering where God has gone. Teresa believed her lifelong dedication to serving God and his people was merely a preparatory phase for her true work after death. But what made her so strong in those desperate times? And this is where it starts to get shocking. On the thrilling occasion of the second anniversary of Mother Teresa's passing, Archbishop Giovanni Battista redelivered a homily that emphasized the central role of prayer in her remarkable life. Love for Christ was the key to her unwavering devotion to the poorest of the poor, both in Calcutta and across the globe. Here's a translation of his inspiring homily, originally given in Italian. Hold tight to God's hand and never let go of it on your journey. These were the words of wisdom shared by her mother, Drena, with Agnes Kongshabujazu, shortly after her decision to embrace religious vows. Agnes, who would later be known worldwide as Mother Teresa of Calcutta. Love of God fueled her concern for the poor. Her mother's words, in a way, foreshadowed Saint Teresa's journey. Embracing God's hand joyfully and resolutely, Saint Teresa faced an extraordinary challenge. At only 36 years of age, the Lord led her on paths she had never imagined before. But just how challenging was this time? Well, you may want to listen to this part. On September 10, 1946, driven by a powerful inner calling, she left the affluent areas of Calcutta behind and wholeheartedly dedicated herself to the part of the city that Jawaharlal Nehru had famously called a nightmare city. It was a place of immense suffering and neglect, teeming with impoverished and starving people, lepers, children, and the dying who had been abandoned in the gutters. Another 4 years would pass before Saint Teresa founded the Missionaries of Charity. Yet, even before that saint, Teresa had already become known as Mother Teresa of Calcutta. The decision to venture into a nightmare city reflected the consistent and courageous choice of a woman who, after placing God at the center of her life, her thoughts and her entire being looked upon all human beings, especially the lowliest and the poorest of the poor, with the eyes of loving compassion and mercy. This was the choice of a woman who wholeheartedly obeyed God's will and loved every human being as God loves them. This was Mother Teresa's secret. God always held the highest priority in her life. One day, Mother Teresa encountered a poor man and brought him into their humble dwelling, where she washed him and restored his dignity. Curiously, the man asked her, "Why are you doing this?" Mother Teresa simply replied, "For love of God." It was her love for God that compelled her to care for the poor. She saw them through God's eyes and loved them with God's heart. Mother Teresa's love for God had a simple, yet profound foundation: prayer. Prayer was always her top priority throughout the day. As she herself said, "My secret is very simple. I pray, praying to Christ." Those who had the privilege of knowing her personally and spending time with her were astonished and deeply moved by the intensity of her prayer life. Thus, she taught her spiritual daughters, the fruit of prayer is faith. The fruit of faith is love. And the fruit of love is dedication to the poor. What truly matters is what God speaks through us. Indeed, it was she who repeatedly told the countless individuals who flocked to Calcutta to hear her words and find guidance in life. To pray is to entrust oneself to God, to make oneself available to Him, and to hear His voice in the depth of one's heart. She lived out what she preached, firmly convinced that the most effective way to renew society is through prayer. In fact, we cannot comprehend Mother Teresa's work without understanding the role of prayer. So what exactly can we all do here to live in Mother Teresa's footsteps? Well, here's the simple yet astounding revelation. Mother Teresa constantly reminded her daughters, what we say is not important. What truly matters is what God says through us. In the face of the evils of our time, Mother Teresa highlighted the immeasurable value of love through the generosity of her life, the courage of her actions, and her tireless work. She used to say, "I will never tire of repeating that what the poor need is not just compassion, but love. They deserve to have the human dignity respected, which is no less important or different from that of any other human being." She urged her sons and daughters not to shy away from loving, to the point of sacrifice, even to the extent of suffering. After all, it was Jesus' love for us that led him to his own death. This sister, with her head covered by a white sari adorned with blue stripes, embodied the words of St. Paul, "If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not loved, I gain nothing." Mother Teresa left us with the example of a woman who passionately loved God and drew boundless inner energy from that love to serve the poorest of the poor. She fearlessly entered the suffering neighborhoods of the city, transforming the nightmare city into a city of joy. Mother Teresa firmly believed that love is the greatest gift. Mother Teresa understood the gospel. For her, the gospel was a gospel of love. And she understood it so profoundly that everyone who encountered her realized that there is more joy in giving than in receiving. She walked through life with unwavering determination, making a lasting impact in the world and inspiring those around her to be kind and good. Her legacy will be remembered forever as a symbol of her deep love for God and her genuine concern for the worth of every individual and every human life. May the same courage that inspired her, her daughters, and her sons to dedicate themselves to the poor, to make those defeated by life feel the tenderness of God's love, illuminate our own journey through life and the journey of all of humanity.